This program is made possible by the support of Delta Dental, Quick Trip, Marshfield Clinic Health System, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Hospital Association. Watch WisconsinEye on Spectrum Channels 995 and 363 and at wiseye.org.
Jason Church of Hudson is one of two Republican candidates running in a special election in the 7th U.S. House District in Wisconsin. That's a huge district, goes from Wausau to Superior, about one-third of Wisconsin. The special election is necessary, of course, because of the resignation of former Representative Sean Duffy. The primary is February 18th. The general election is May 12th. Jason Church, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Steve, thanks for having me.
Now that you've been around the district, you're from Hudson. It's a huge district. Biggest need of the 7th District, sir?
Well, there's a lot of needs, but certainly with the farmers in this district, we've been hit pretty hard, and we've seen, more farm closures over the last, few years than have had in, previous decades. And we need to be able to provide opportunity for them to sell their products. And I think recently with the actual passing in the House and the Senate of the USMCA, and hopefully soon here the signature to get all of that done, that will provide the relief needed for dairy farmers, certainly with what the Canadians have been doing for a long time with their milk industry, which really was prohibiting a lot of our own dairy products going in there. I think that will be a help. And I would like to work with the President on some deals that would allow us to export more products from Wisconsin, not only for dairy farmers, but manufacturers as a whole.
Have the President's tariffs hurt dairy producers and manufacturers and other segments of the economy in the 7th?
Well, tariffs are hard, but I agree with what the President is doing. There's a big problem here with what the People's Republic of China has done. I mean, since they've been admitted into the World Trade Organization in the late 90s, the Communist Party has done everything they can to steal intellectual property, create mere organizations to undercut American manufacturers, and they've used that newfound wealth to not only invest it into some of their more oppressive practices within their country, but also to invest it into hard military power assets abroad. I think this is a bigger problem, than just the tariff. And the president has understood that, which is why he's trying to get them to the negotiating table, which is what I think the tariffs have done. That's why you have phase one of the deal currently in process. The people in the 7th Congressional District understand that. They've been seeing what China has done over the past couple decades. They understand this. They support the President on it. And I would like to work with the President on other trade deals that would allow them to export their products. Certainly, obviously, ginseng is big in Marathon County.
It is. In fact, I think Marathon County is the #1 producer of ginseng in the nation.
Yeah. I mean, I might get fact-checked on this, but I think it's about 90% of the U.S. ginseng is actually produced in Marathon County.
And has ginseng production been hurt by the international trade discussion?
So there is a very large demand for American ginseng. It's generally considered the best product, certainly compared to Chinese ginseng, and most ginseng consumers are over in the Asian countries. Obviously, the Chinese are trying to target, areas that support the President, much like the 7th Congressional District. But at the end of the day, that's what gets them to the table. And it's the President's policies that have gotten China to the table and are getting them to actually do the things that we need them to do, because at the end of the day, they're taking advantage of this system, and the President called them out on it.
Okay. And logging is important in 7th District. How's that industry fared in the last few years? What are you hearing?
So, obviously the biggest thing you hear from any of the industries up there, certainly when it comes to logging, is overregulation. And when the federal government comes in and basically through feel-good legislation or through what I think is broad statutory language that then is interpreted by a court, certainly maybe more of an activist court in the southern part of this country at the federal level, that puts more compliance costs upon these companies, really just basically stymieing their ability to reinvest and innovate. So that's the biggest concern I hear from most of those in the logging industry, is the regulations imposed by Washington.
Your campaign site says you want to take the skills learned in the military. Those skills are needed in Washington. Now, you were an Army captain, you retired as a captain.
Yes.
2012 incident cost you your legs amputated below the knees. What do you mean when you say skills you learned in the military are needed in Washington, sir?
Well, we need people who come from outside politics that have leadership demonstration in other facets. And I think the military is one of those areas where it teaches you to prioritize and then execute missions. And I think right now that's not what we're doing in Washington. I think Washington right now, certainly in the Congress, is more concerned about politics as usual and getting reelected. And that's part of the reason why I've also said I have no plans on serving more than 4 terms or 8 years.
4 terms or 8 years.
Because I think the problems exist because people are making calculations based off of what they believe is in their best interest of getting reelected instead of doing what's right for the country. And serving in uniform, I served, and I know a lot of my colleagues, brothers and sisters in arms serve because of love for country. And I think we need more of that mentality in Washington than currently exists today.
After you retired as a captain for medical reasons, you worked for Senator Johnson. What did you learn about Congress and how it works or doesn't work being on the senator's staff?
I learned how dysfunctional it was. I met Senator Johnson when I was recovering at Walter Reed. He visited me as a constituent. He had no idea what my political beliefs were, nothing. He just heard wounded vet from Wisconsin. I'm going to go up and see him. Mm-hmm. And after chatting with me for 45 minutes, he found I was pretty opinionated, and we saw eye to eye on a lot of things. And so we cut some red tape because, quite frankly, it's bureaucracy, and the Army is certainly capable of hampering good ideas. And he was able to get me down there, and I worked as a military fellow for a year. So I worked on defense issues, VA issues, some trade issues. I never got involved in the political areas because I was still in uniform, mm-hmm. So I was only just doing things that were strictly of legislative nature. And I saw how dysfunctional Washington was, but I also saw what great leadership brings and how it can actually make a difference. And I think Senator Johnson has done that. I was proud to be a member of his staff and work with him. He has certainly done a lot of things on the HISGAC, which he has chaired, certainly when it's come to issues like immigration and actually going to some of the roots of those problems instead of just the political rhetoric. But like any sane individual, I could only stand Washington for a little while, and I came back to Wisconsin after I was done with my master's out there.
Now, you, given all the issues you worked on, what's the greatest threat to America right now, Jason?
China. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. So, we mentioned earlier in this interview, obviously, the president's position on tariffs with China. And I think that's important because what they've been doing is they view the last 100 years that has been going on in their country as an anomaly in the trajectory of the Chinese people culture. And you have some hawks now that have come into power there. Xi Jinping comes from a long line now of people who are trying to reestablish China not only as a global leader, but as the world leader. So what they've been doing is accumulating a vast amount of wealth and investing that in the military that I think, certainly within the next decade or two, unless we were able to take steps in Congress, would have the ability to not only challenge but potentially push us out of certain areas or even defeat us in conflict. They are investing a substantial amount of money in what we call a blue water navy. That's the ability to leave the shorelines and actually project power across the globe. We have that power, the Brits have that power, the Russians to a certain capability. That is scary. They're building islands in the South China Sea. They said those were for scientific purposes. We know that's not the case. They are clearly building airstrips there with military capabilities. And that's going to interdict 25% of the world's commerce. They know that. They're building bases in Djibouti. They're behaving aggressively within their country. And this is not going to stop unless we actually put the economic levers and twist the screw back on them with this, which is what President Trump's doing. Mm-hmm. This is, I think, the greatest geopolitical threat of the 21st century, because if it's not handled, it could lead to war. And that's one thing we all want to avoid, certainly somebody who's seen it. Yeah. And you need to make this you need to do the things necessary to prevent that from occurring, or what we call a Thucydides trap.
As somebody who underwent 21 surgeries, recovering from your injuries suffered in military service, do we need to reform how the Veterans Administration cares for veterans like yourself?
Well, I think the VA is an example of what would happen, again, if we adopted policies like Medicare for all. Look, this is a system I go to, and to be quite frank with you, the idea of it being extrapolated in the country is frightening. The problem is you have, and it's not that everyone who works at the VA is a bad employee. I'm not making that statement at all. I've worked with some great people there. But the problem is when you have providers that are accountable to a bureaucrat in Washington and not to the patient, you create conflicts of interest. Mm-hmm. And you see that time and time again in the VA. The way it's administered is almost, it's very stereotypical of a government bureaucracy in that there's fiefdoms and there's just basically different geographic areas that fight with each other and then don't communicate. And then oftentimes because of the way the military communicates or fails to communicate with the VA, so many records get screwed up. Things get screwed up with the veteran. Care isn't properly provided. And so for me, yes, the system does need to be not only closely examined, but in a lot of ways overhauled to provide more quality care.
Do you like the change that says you can seek a private physician if you can't get an appointment within X number of days or something?
I mean, I like the idea, and I certainly like the idea of always using private medicine, but let's take an example that's very specific to the 7th Congressional District. You're up in northern Wisconsin. Your nearest VA hospital is a long ways away. And oftentimes, depending on which place you go, they may or may not provide the service, but they may require you to go there anyway because of the bureaucratic checklist. Someone who lives in Eagle River may have to go to Iron Mountain in Michigan to get some document signed off so that they can then go to Toma. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Right.
And I've seen that countless times in some of the veterans I've talked to up there over the past couple months. But the thing is, whenever politicians go into Washington and they think that they're going to do all this great language and feel-good stuff, but what they do is they're actually creating layers of bureaucracy. And that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the veteran, and it's counterintuitive to the mission of the VA.
Just kind of a personal question. Given what you've experienced and lost, how do you react when someone says thanks for your service?
I used to have a harder time with it. I used to. And then I had a wise person tell me something that I'll never forget. I was walking just toward a subway, and an individual who clearly saw I was walking with a limp, I was just a new amputee. It was about a year, not even a year after I lost my legs. Young guy, could probably put two and two together that I was, injured in Afghanistan or Iraq. And he comes up to me and says, "Are you a veteran?" And I was like, yeah. Well, thank you for your service. And I had a hard time taking that. And an individual who was walking with me noticed it. So when we got in the subway, he asked me, "Jason, why did you react that way?" I said, "Well, I think of the buddies I've lost. I think of those who are more injured than me, and I just have a hard time accepting that." And he looked at me. He said, "Jason, you weren't around during Vietnam. You weren't around when we had service members come home that were spit on and treated like garbage. So when someone thanks you for your service, don't take it selfishly. Take it for all those who never had the opportunity to be thanked." And that's always stuck with me. It sticks with me to this day. And so when someone thanks me for my service, I'm very thankful for that and always say thank you.
It's an incredibly interesting and historical time in Washington. I think I know the answer. How would you have voted? How would you have voted as a House member in the articles of impeachment?
I would have voted against it.
Why?
I think that this again has been a political stunt since the moment Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. I just think that there was this assumption amongst the other side that Hillary Clinton was going to become President of the United States, and they just couldn't accept the fact that certainly northern Wisconsin in particular voted for Donald Trump. You saw this with the initial investigation. I think you saw this really play out in a very, very, very cruel and partisan way with the Kavanaugh hearings, where you're basically trying to assassinate a man's character, and you're seeing it now today. It's truly political, which that was not the intent of the founders. And I think that with the rhetoric that's being thrown around in Washington right now, they're simply trying to remove him by impeachment and finding him guilty in the Senate instead of at the ballot box, because there are overwhelming, not only obviously Republicans but Democrats as well that voted for President Trump. You certainly saw it up in the 7th Congressional District. And it's because he's an outsider who brings a different perspective, who's certainly willing to ruffle feathers in Washington. And that's why I voted for him. That's why I voted for him in the primary. And it's upset, I think, the status quo of Washington.
Do you believe the president's charge there is his term deep state, who deep in the federal bureaucracy working to oust him?
Well, you could certainly see with some of the texts and certain things that went through with the people in the FBI at the time that certainly did not want this man to be elected president. So I certainly think there were individuals who were working within the government that did not want this man to be elected president. But I think the bigger problem here, Steve, is that with any bureaucracy, there is an entrenchment that occurs. There is this idea that you're going to hold on to whatever has been given to you, whether it be via the Congress or via a regulatory ruling. And you can see the bureaucratic knife fights come out. So when you have somebody like President Trump who comes in there and is like, you know what, I'm not going to go with the status quo on this. I don't agree with what you guys are doing. I'm going to try and cut this out. It angers people. And I guess, there is, in my mind, a part of the federal government, deep state, if you will, that is certainly not wanting President Trump to remain in office. But I think that's also part of just any bureaucracy, any federal government agency that has a vested interest in staying in the position it currently is.
Do you think impeachment will play a role in whoever wins the special election in the 7th, Jason?
Well, I hope this is all resolved by the time May 12th rolls around here. I mean, I think that the thing is, though, again, this has all been in my mind, a political stunt from the start. So this is an idea of trying to rally the base, I think, certainly for the coasts of this country, which are predominantly Democratic, in the sense of their party affiliation. And so I don't think it's going to do anything in terms of well, actually, I take that back. I'll say this. I think it's upset a lot of people in the 7th Congressional District. I think there's been a lot of people who have come up to me recently and said, why are they trying to throw out the guy that I have elected to the White House for what are just strictly political reasons? And President Trump has seen his popularity grow in the 7th Congressional District because of it. So, in fact, I think that it just shows, again, the disconnect between the coasts in Washington and northern Wisconsin. You
said we don't need the universal health care plan advocated by Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders. But do we need to repeal? If you were in the House and there was another vote to repeal Obamacare, how would you vote? And if you voted to repeal Obamacare, what should it be replaced with? Or what health care changes do we need as a nation?
So I would vote to repeal it.
You would.
And I think that what we need to do is lower regulations that allow for more innovation to occur in the healthcare industry. Let's take a couple examples that I think are pertinent in the 7th Congressional. Marshfield Clinic is one of the largest employers in the 7th Congressional District. They're a predominantly rural medicine-based medical care provider. Mm-hmm. I just met with some of their leadership, and one of the things, and they're one of many, I'm not just, there's other great providers. I was just singling out Marshfield Clinic because it's one that is in the district and I've spoken to. They're telling me, obviously, one of the problems, this is rural medicine. I mean, you have to drive 2.5 hours. It's the same issue I was talking about with the VA and having to go to Iron Mountain or Toma. I mean, you still have some of these same issues with someone who's in Tomahawk, up there and trying to get down to Wausau or to Marshfield. And if you're sick or you're elderly, sometimes it's hard to drive those 2.5 hours. And rural roads in the middle of winter in northern Wisconsin are not easy to traverse. So the ability for them to provide more mobile care, whether that's through like a Skype or some way of being able to work with a physician from a remote location, then go to either a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner or someone to get the medications you need.
Which needs broadband, doesn't it?
It does.
Excuse me.
No. That's something we can get to in a minute. But the idea is that you need to have this innovation, and you need to do that through deregulation, because at this point in time, a lot of the things they want to do are not allowed. They can't do that. You need to have more price transparency. Right now, I mean, you don't know what you're paying for. If you go get cataract surgery in Wausau as opposed to, say, Oklahoma City, you don't know the difference. Heck, the doctors don't even know what these things cost. And I think more price transparency creates more competition, which is part of our economic model, and that has brought us prosperity for centuries now. The other thing I would say is that the ease of having health insurance across state lines and being able to make that, quite frankly, a more, I would say, streamlined process.
That's a barrier that now exists, selling across state lines.
Exactly.
That barrier should come down?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think those are things that are problematic and exacerbate the healthcare costs within our system.
Well, a few issues of foreign affairs, especially given your military experience. Did you support President Trump's order to assassinate the Iranian general?
So, yes, but I'd usually not like to use the word, assassinate, in the sense that no one really called, when President Obama ordered the killing of Osama bin Laden, no one called it assassinating Osama bin Laden.
Okay.
At the end of the day, President Trump killed a terrorist. Qasem Soleimani led the Quds Force. The Quds Force in Iran was responsible for the proliferation of terrorist activities throughout the Middle East for the better part of the last 2 decades. Not only with Hezbollah, but obviously with proxies in Iraq and Afghanistan. This man provided the blueprints, the material, the know-how, and the overall leadership structure to build a lot of the IEDs that were used in Iraq and Afghanistan. You can't go and build one of these things in your backyard. You need expertise and know-how. And a lot of my friends were killed by this individual. He may have been the one that provided a lot of the material assistance that got the IED that injured me. Mm-hmm. And removing him removed the head of a snake that had leadership qualities that were incredibly detrimental to our efforts in the region, and were very destructive as a whole. So eliminating this individual was something that should have honestly been done a long time ago.
Should U.S. troops be withdrawn from Afghanistan?
I think that our reasons for going to Afghanistan in the first place were just. Think about this. The reason one of the worst terrorist attack in our country's history happened was because Mullah Omar and the Taliban housed Osama bin Laden in the mountains of Afghanistan, and when that event happened, when we lost the Twin Towers, parts of the Pentagon, and thousands of lives, we went to him. We went to Mullah Omar. We said, "Hey, give us Osama bin Laden." He said, "No. We're going to go get him." So we did. And for 20 years, we've been trying to do a lot of things in Afghanistan. I think getting rid of the Taliban was certainly important in the beginning and remains an important fight today, but we're not going to change 2,000 years in 20. I will say this, though. We don't want Afghanistan to return to the same position it was prior to 9/11. And if we completely withdraw, we completely remove our presence, that place, having been there myself, I know it is really tribal, and the influence of the national government in Kabul is limited. So without some U.S. presence, which honestly we have different capabilities and presence than we did before 9/11, our abilities with drones, our abilities with precision strikes, our abilities with special operation forces have vastly improved, and there does need to be a presence that allows us to prohibit terrorism from proliferating again, because that's the one thing we never want. And Afghanistan, just geographically and historically, can provide fertile ground for that if not checked.
It's a long way from where you served, but any thoughts on the next steps in dealing with the nuclear threat posed by North Korea, sir?
Well, we have had presidents try, since the end of the Korean War, to work with North Korea. And, Kim Jong-un comes from the Kim family, now the third in that dynasty, that has done everything they can to solidify power in Pyongyang. They repress their people. They do so many heinous things that are just, quite frankly, unspeakable. The problem is nothing before President Trump has worked. They've been continually trying to proliferate their nuclear ambitions and nuclear technology. They have worked with states like China and Russia to get, the ability to create these things. Mm-hmm. And I applaud President Trump's approach in actually trying to work with him. And people are like, well, why would he want to talk to a dictator? Well, he wields so much power in that country. I mean, he is the apparatus of that country. And to actually affect this individual, I believe that personal one-on-one dealings work. And the president, he has a history of being a deal maker. That's what he does. It's what he did before he became the President of the United States. And I think we have to be able to have that open line for him to work with Kim Jong-un, because at the end of the day, we don't want a nuclear North Korea that at the press of a button could annihilate not only Seoul or Tokyo, but could potentially reach somewhere like Los Angeles. When you look at diplomacy and you look at warfare, I get a little Clausewitzian on this, and there is an element that war is a continuation of politics by other means, and you always have diplomacy on the table, no matter what the situation is. And President Trump has taken the diplomatic angle, but he's not just dismissing the military angle of this. We have just built up a new base south of Seoul that will have better ability to respond, because for the longest time the U.S. Army was based in the city of Seoul, and given the growth of this city, its capabilities to actually conduct military operations significantly diminished. Now we have that ability to actually counteract things that could happen on the peninsula and get them out of the artillery range from North Korea. So there are things that are there. The president's working on it, and I think our approach and the president's approach has been the right one with North Korea.
How severe is the threat posed by climate change, Jason?
Well, there's so many things that are being talked about with climate change right now, and you hear the rhetoric thrown out, and some of this, I think, is the same things we've been hearing for 50 years, quite frankly, within the scientific community, that some of it never came to fruition. I think the honest discussion that needs to be had, the real one, is when I hear legislators push things like the Green New Deal, when I hear things like that, to me, this is just feel-good legislation that would actually not accomplish a darn thing other than stymieing innovation and the things that quite frankly, make the economic engine of this country work. We have regulations in this country. You're not just dumping stuff into rivers, and you shouldn't be. You're not just burning down things. Those are already in place. So what we're doing is we're just limiting our own ability to innovate and provide prosperity for not only Wisconsin, but Americans as a whole. The real question we have to ask, look what China and India are doing. The 10 most polluted rivers in the world are not in North America. They're in Asia. Those two countries have done nothing to help their own populations in these areas. I mean, there's a lot of sickness. I mean, just look what's coming out of China right now with the recent virus scare, the coronavirus. These things happen because of conditions exacerbated, quite frankly, by poor hygiene and other, concerns around cities in China. They're not taking the steps necessary. So, if we limit ourselves by feel-good legislation, we're not going to be able to have any leverage on people like China and India to get them to do the right thing.
Immigration. Do you support the president's proposal for a border wall? And what about the need for immigration reform?
So, I support President Trump's position on the wall. I think that we need to build the wall. We need border security down there. And quite frankly, we have a deportation system that is overloaded. I mean, when someone's apprehended across the border, they're brought before a judge, and because of the backlog in proceedings, it takes 6 or 7 months to get them back in front of that judge, and by that time, a majority of them don't show up. I mean, you can leave Arizona and go to Wisconsin, for example. The president's doing everything he can. But the reason this exists in the first place is because the Congress has taken no action to reform the immigration and nationality statutes. This is an onion layer on top of an onion layer on top of an onion layer. In fact, a lot of, I think, what incentivizes the illegal immigration in this country is the loopholes within our own system, and then the interpretations by the Supreme Court of certain statutes that have been passed saying that, hey, Congress said this is the way it is. And in my mind, it's incentivizing people to cross the border knowing that we can't do some of the things that are necessary to prohibit more of the crossings. I deal with this personally myself. My fiance is from Brazil. We have dealt with the immigration system more than I ever thought I would growing up in northern Wisconsin. And as someone who's been trained in the law, it's taken me months and months and months to navigate it and work with it. I can only imagine what it's like for someone who doesn't have that background and training. This needs to be a system that is overhauled. It's quite frankly incentivizing all the wrong things and not doing enough of the good things. But right now I think politics is a priority in Washington over sensible legislation, and I think that the Democrats right now are using this as an ability to incentivize and excite their base more than actually get something done.
Final question. Differences between first you and Senator Tom Tiffany, your opponent in the primary, and then the two Democrats, Tricia Zunker and Lawrence Dale. Differences between you and other candidates, sir?
I never thought I'd be in politics. I wanted to serve our country in uniform. That's how I wanted to give back. Growing up in northern Wisconsin and seeing my father serve, uncle serve, and grandfather serve, that's how I wanted to give back to this nation that had given us so much. But after I was wounded in Afghanistan, I couldn't give back anymore. I couldn't kick in doors and chase down America's enemies. That being said, even though the Taliban took my legs, America's enemies didn't extinguish my desire to serve. And I see things that are going on right now in our country and the trajectory it's going on, where we need a generation of leadership to go into Washington that is not just doing it for the political climbing of a ladder, not just trying to move up places, but to do the things right in the moment we need them done. And then move on. I don't want to do this forever. I think that's the difference between me and my primary opponent. When it comes to the two Democrats, obviously I think they are getting more towards the socialist view of politics right now. You just see the rhetoric that's going on right now, certainly with the Democrat candidates for president, really pushing an agenda I think that would be destructive, not only to the country as a whole, but certainly northern Wisconsin. And I think that at the end of the day, I will always put this country first. And I think this district needs someone who's going to be a fighter in Washington and not just another rubber stamp. And I will certainly bring that as a member of Congress.
Jason Church of Hudson, is one of two Republican candidates in the special election in the 7th Congressional District, the 7th U.S. House District. The primary is February 18th. The general special election is May 12th. Jason, thanks very much. And just a programming note, you can watch WisconsinEye's interview with Democrat Tricia Zunker, and we've invited Senator Tiffany also to conduct an interview. Jason, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.